Yes, I was actually a witness because it was exactly Sunday. My husband, we were already married. My husband took a job in Zielona, and I was with my husband in Zielona. And where is that? That's near Kutno, near the Lodz province, near Kutno over there. And I was with him there to see him, and I was coming back because I was returning home here, right, and coming back precisely from Zielona. I came by train, and somehow I hadn't noticed anything yet. But I got to the bus here on Kasprowicza because the bus was here, the stop. And suddenly I see something, those stones torn up. Something wasn't as it should be on Kasprowicza, right? On Kasprowicza. And look, and so I ask, and so I hear such unrest, and in general, and it turns out there is unrest because there's a demonstration, and there's this riot regarding the Catholic house. Next to the Church of Our Lady of Częstochowa, in Zielona Góra, there was the Catholic house. There, in that Catholic house, religion was taught. Various types of events were held. There was a kindergarten there. There were meetings of various kinds, both service-related and social, but everything Catholic. Yes, everything. And the interesting thing is that back then, Father Kazimierz Michalski was here as if he oversaw all of that. And it turned out that, well, as we say, the communists decided to take away that Catholic house because when they organized some events, they had to ask the priest there for permission and so on. And that didn't suit them because the fight against Catholicism existed and continues until now. So they started demanding that the house be taken over as a state building. Well, the priest didn't really want to accept that, and I know there was no consent. It lasted quite a long time, even when the president went there, or the first secretary of the party, to see the priest and tells him that they should nevertheless hand it over, and he replied, "We depend on each other. If you," he says, "want, for example, to organize some event for a state ceremony, the priest always wrote some speeches for them around there. Then I won't write that anymore," and so on. There were things like that they depended on each other. But the strength of the communists was greater, and they decided to take the house by force. Similar to how it was with the radio, with the television here in Poland when our power changed, that in one day everything disappeared. And so it began that house, they defended it a lot. Well, like you, me alone, like the priest. So again, like the priest, the faithful, the religious. And when they actually came there to take it away by force, there was always someone there, so they didn't have that chance. Either the nuns were there, or there was a religion class, or no one left the building, and there were continuous disagreements. And I know that precisely then, on that Sunday when I was returning, those Real riots started, that they decided to take it by force, and then there were so many people were there. Inhabitants of Zielona Góra and the surrounding areas defended that house, but the authorities in turn decided to use force. So not only did the police act here alone, they brought reinforcements from Potnin and Sulchow and Gorzo and Krosno, from wherever they could. They brought the ZOMO, and there were so many of them, and that's why the civilians were simply no longer able to defend themselves. Right? They used force. I know because I was a witness. I saw how they beat terribly both with batons and with gas. And with batons they beat terribly. They didn't look where, if it was a woman, if it was a child, or if it was a man. That fight existed. And these, again, didn't have much to defend themselves with. Well, so with stones, with whatever they were given, with sticks, with whatever they could, with that the civilians defended themselves. But the police used gas then, and I remember standing there. Suddenly I started tearing up so much that I couldn't see anything, and it was then that I felt exactly that the gas was there. Well, when they started gassing, well, you know, people anyway, as if that fight weakened and they simply won. They were wounded. I know they were wounded. I even heard a man running and shouting. You, ZOMO member, he says, and he was dressed in civilian clothes because they disguised themselves as civilians so their own wouldn't be recognized. He says, you, he says, ZOMO member, you disguised yourself, and yet you are my colleague, and you are beating my wife, who is walking over there. He was shouting. I remember that as if it were today. It was a very sad image for me. Even before I arrived, I saw those holes in that police building. There were broken windows and there were holes in the wall in that one on Kasprowicza Street too. 2 burned cars. And well, there I know the cars were burned, that thing on Kasprowicza Street. In general, there were terrible riots. The Poles remembered them, as well as the inhabitants of Zielona Góra, and those incidents were called the Zielona Góra Events. In history.
Obrazek dla mnie bardzo przykry. Już przede mną, nim przyjechałam, to widziałam takie dziury w tym budynku policyjnym. Były szyby wybite i były dziury w murze. W tym na Kasprowicza.
Dwa auta spalone.
No i tam wiem, że auta były spalone, że tam ulicą Kupiecką, no w ogóle były rozruchy straszne. Zapamiętali Polacy to i zielonogórzanie i te wydarzenia te zdarzenia zostały nazwane wydarzeniami zielonogórskimi. To tak w historii